Hello and welcome back. Now this is going to be the final part of Let's Blend a Musket, and I think it's going to be the longest one. Because it's such a complicated model, the texturing process is going to take quite a while. So I hope you're going to enjoy it, and we're going to blend out and get started with texturing the gun. Okay, now as ever, I'm going to move the parts of the mesh around so I can easily get to them individually with the brush. It just makes painting with textures a whole lot easier. I do this every time I'm painting in Blender. I think it's the best way to kind of organize it. And if you use like integers when you're grabbing the parts and moving them around, then you know exactly where to put them back into place, so you don't lose track of them or anything like that. So you don't just hit G and move them around, you actually hit G then a number, so you can put it back in the same place. And I'm not just moving them on one axis, so I won't just move these parts here on the Z, because that means they'll be out of the way when I'm painting sideways, but when I go into top view they'll be in the way there, so I have to move them on at least two axes so that I can get the brush to them on all angles. So make sure every object has got its own room for painting in. And then I'm just moving the separate objects around as well. It's not that they'll get in the way for painting, it's just so I can see the parts when I'm painting them. And we'll move these up. They're fine right there, because we can easily see the model. Okay, I think that most of the parts out of the way. Just to move the trigger out of the way as well. And now we'll take it into texture paint mode. Now you're going to want to choose an image here. I'll go for the wood grain texture, and I'll use this for the body, the stock of the gun. You can use F to scale up the brush quickly, but I want to make this texture a bit darker, so we can just change the colour on the side there, and we can easily achieve that. And we're just going to side view, nice and easily just painting the texture on the side like that. Make sure you keep the same distance so the texture will be the same resolution. If you zoom in closer, then it'll be a different resolution to if you zoomed out. I'm just going to fix this part here, because you can see that the texture got stretched when we went into side view there. Then we've got this part at the back which we need to fix, just like that. But that also leaves us with this horrible thing on the side here. So if we change the strength down to something like that, and then we can blend it together quite nicely so we don't get the problem recurring again. And we'll do the same to the bottom, because we've still got that black line that we had before. I'm just going to touch it up here, trying to get rid of those lines that we don't want, and we're left with this kind of bit here that we didn't do properly. So if we just change the strength a bit more lower, and then we can fix that while not spoiling the rest of the gun. We're just doing a quick check over to check if there's anything that we need to fix, like that part there. With this kind of texture, you need to be careful because you've got this wood grain pattern, which means you've got the kind of direction that the texture needs to go in. And then because you can clearly see the direction because of the wood grain, that you can easily come into problems with this sort of thing. So you need to make sure that you get everything flowing nicely. But with other patterns, it doesn't really matter. So like a clouds pattern, or you know, something that doesn't have a direction, you don't need to worry about that sort of thing. And that part there was hard to reach, so we can easily edit that in the UV image editor by changing it from view mode to paint mode. And then we can paint on this, and because we did a really nice UV map, it just makes it a hell of a lot easier for us to do so. If we did a really messy UV unwrap, or even worse, we did a smart UV unwrap, we couldn't really tell which parts were what, and we'd really struggle with this sort of thing. But as we've done it quite nicely, we've made the job really easy for us. So if we do ever come into problems like we did before, we can easily switch it to the image editor, and we can edit it in 2D rather than the brush in 3D. So if you change the size of the brush on the left, it'll change on the right window as well. And just as you can paint it on the model and it will show up in the texture, vice versa, if you paint it on the texture, it will show up on the model. It's really cool, that feature. I think that's mostly done. I think we can close that now. We can get started on another part. Just choose another texture. How about a nice copper texture? We can use this for the copper fittings on the musket, like the bottom of the handle and the trigger and stuff like that. We want to try and get this to contrast with the darkness of the gun. I think that'll get us quite a nice effect. You don't want it all to be dark, you want some kind of contrasting colours, some complementary colours. That'll get your model looking really professional. You can't just slap on some random textures, they'll just look really horrible. You've got to pick your colours quite carefully. It makes a big difference. And we'll do the same for this part here, the trigger housing. And again, we'll try and keep the brush at the same distance, so we don't get like a more detailed or less detailed texture. We want to try and keep the resolution more or less the same, or things will look out of place. It's like say you were doing a texture for a brick wall and the bricks were absolutely tiny. That wouldn't really work. You've got the right texture, fair enough, but if you're painting it at the wrong size, that isn't relative to the camera or the world, you're gonna go into some problems there. So just keep this rule in mind when you are texturing, and it will make things seem more in place and a lot more realistic. And the trigger is going to be made out of the same stuff. I think if we made all of the gun just like one type of metal and then just having the wood, I think that would look boring. I think it's like a nice touch to have some of these slightly different coloured parts. Move on to another texture now. A light, we'll have a different one. I'll save that one for another part. And I think we'll choose this one. This is kind of a dark grey metal. I think we'll use it for the barrel of the gun. Now you can see that because I've done that so close, that the texture quite easily tiles. And we don't want that. We want to try and zoom out so we get like a less tiled effect, because the texture is quite big. So we've always got that option to zoom out and do a slightly larger scale paint. Though if you're working with like really low resolution textures, which is bad, you're kind of forced to be zoomed in a lot. So always try and work with the higher resolution textures, and that means you've always got the option to zoom out and paint at a different scale without getting that kind of blurriness and pixelation. So I always recommend textures of at least 512. I prefer stuff like 1024 because it really gives you some control and detail in your textures. So do try and get the higher resolution versions if you can. If not, don't worry too much. I'm sure it'll still work out fine. One of the important things to eliminate in tiling textures is things that people can easily pick out. Like you saw before, there were these white scratches. They stood out a lot, and it means when we tile it, you can easily tell. So I was just trying to get rid of those for that reason. Now, this is another example of using the UV image editor to edit the texture. We can't get to this part inside the barrel. It's simply too hard to reach. So if we go into paint mode here, you can see straight away where we need to do it, because we did that nice organized UV map. You can tell where we need to go without any problems. So I do recommend doing a really good map before you start your texturing. Don't just rush into it and do a quick one or a smart UV project, which I'm sure a lot of you people will do, but you shouldn't. Don't rush into it. It just causes a lot of problems further down the line. it's fine that it's a bit more dark, because naturally it would be because of the shadow and stuff like that, and also because we want to add some depth to it, because it is further down inside the barrel. So if we make it darker, it kind of adds that effect. We could do like the shadows and everything using something called ambient occlusion. I think I've got enough time to tell you what that is in this episode, so I'll go ahead and tell you now. Ambient occlusion, it basically models singular meshes can't cast shadows upon themselves. Particularly in like a game engine, real-time rendering, they just can't do it. So what you need to do to mimic that effect is something called an ambient occlusion map. And it's really simple. It's basically just where the shadows would be. So it makes certain parts of the texture darker than others. They're really easy to do. You just click bake ambient occlusion, and it does it according to where you've got the light in your scene. But I'm not going to do that in this. I will just paint them straight on without doing the ambient occlusion map. And the thing with ambient occlusion maps is that they are okay, but if you have a light moving in your scene, the ambient occlusion map will stay the same. So even though you've got the light somewhere else, the shadows will still be in the same place, unless you obviously bake in the ambient occlusion map in real time. But that is kind of reliant on your hardware. You need a good computer to do that. So I'm just not going to have it at all, and so we avoid all those problems straight away. And anyway, ambient occlusion maps only really come into their own for really intricate models. With this, it's kind of a smooth shape, so there wouldn't be much shadows anyway. So there's really no point in adding an ambient occlusion map to this model. Now I've just started painting those screws there, and now I'm going to paint this. I'll use the same texture. We'll just try and get the right resolution. You can see there it's started to tile, so we'll undo that, zoom out, and hopefully we won't get as much tiling going on. And that looks fine to me. Now what else have we got to do? We've done the barrel, we've done the stock, all the copper parts. So I think only thing that's left now is the hammer and the frizzen. So we'll move that adjusting screw out the way so we can get to the rest of the model. And we'll load up a different texture just to have some variation. I think we'll go for that light metal we had before. Actually, should we have that brushed metal? Nah. We'll change it to thumbnail view so we can actually see what we're doing. And yeah, I think that's the one that I'm going to go for. Just take it into side view there and paint it on. Now if you zoom too far out, you will get some blurriness going on, because instead of the texture getting minimized or staying the same when you're painting it on, it'll actually get bigger. That's one of the problems caused by low resolution textures. So I'm just trying to get that balance there. Really, having a numpad is essential for Blender. I use it about for 50% of the keys that I use for Blender, so I use it all the time. It's really important for kind of technical models, technical drawings and that sort of stuff, because you need to get into the fixed views, and that will help you a lot when you're doing kind of hard surface modeling and that sort of stuff. We're trying to get all around here. Don't try not to leave any parts out, obviously. Now just go and check over it again, because when you paint another part it might have slipped onto another part of the model and you'd have some stretched out stuff going on there. So we just check around there. You can see that we stretched the texture out at the bottom, so we're just fixing that. And again over there, just quickly fix that. And you know, I was telling you before about textures with a direction. Well, this metal one doesn't really have one, so you see that it's a lot quicker. We don't have to worry about what angle we're at, because you can really paint it in any direction you want and you won't really notice. Move on to the frizzing now. Same as before. I think texturing, a lot of people don't do it. It's like, do you know when you get those Airfix models, or model kit? I used to love making them, but one of the things that got me was painting them. A lot of people, it's a really hard thing to do, texturing, actually. I mean, I'm not the best at it. I'm sure a lot of people are better than me at it, but you can't really make a model without a texture. It might be nice to look at, but you can't really use it in anything like a game or a movie or an animation. Things really need a texture, and it's hard to do. So I suggest you try and learn to texture, because it is really important and it's really hard to do. It's not something that will take like a couple of hours to learn. I've spent ages texturing and I'm still learning now. I'm using a slightly darker version of the texture on this screw, just so we can tell that it's actually a separate object. Now I'm gonna do the thread of the screw now. This might take a while, so I'm just doing the thread like that. Maybe a bit lighter. I'll also rotate it so I can just brush straight across like that. I'm just drawing across with a smaller, darker coloured brush now, just to get like the highlights and the lower parts of the thread. Oops, I'll just undo that one. Now, using the numpad, I can take it into a different view now. Not that one, the other one. And you can see that half of it has already been done for us, so we can continue the line across, and the lines will join up perfectly. I use this method a lot when I'm doing stuff like this, which need clear lines across like this. I rotated it 30 degrees. I didn't just hit R like that. Like when I was telling you before about moving the objects around, I need to know exactly how much. So I can just hit R minus 30, and then I'll put it straight back into place with no problems. No guesswork. To match up, if we go to front view now, because we can see where it is on the side view that we did before, we can just follow that line across. Now I think that's the screw done. Just move it back into place. Rotate it 30. And it's back where it was. So I think, is that all the texture's done? Well, we can tell by taking this into texture view. We'll just we'll move everything back into place. And that fits snugly back where it was, because as before, we are moving it in integer units. You'll see it all come into place now. All the hard work we've done. I think I've forgotten this bit. Yeah, I have. See if I can remember what sort of settings I used. I think it was that kind of lightness. If we take this into texture view, we can see if it matches the other things we've done. And I think that's fine. Yeah. Try not to get too excited. I know you can see the rest of it. And it's just a case of moving everything back to where it was. Just move those down. And that's fine. And last of all is the trigger. And everything's back where it was. So now we are going to add a lamp. We'll get the camera into the right sort of view. So we want it looking straight to the side. So we change it to, what is that? 90, 0 and 0. Move it on the y-axis so we can fit the whole thing in. And we'll get the lamp in the right position. We'll rotate it towards the gun, kind of like that. We don't just want the top of it lit. And before we can render it, well, we could render it but the textures wouldn't show up. We need to make a material with the texture. So we'll make like kind of greyish specular. Make it low intensity. All that sort of stuff. Now we're going to add the texture we made. Image or movie. And that is Musket. We'll set it to UV coordinates. And it's already on diffuse influence. Now if we assign this material to all the parts of the gun. Oops, I forgot that part there. Just quickly add that. Make some quick adjustments to the texture. And that looks pretty good. I mean, we could do some changes like making a different material for the metal parts, add in reflection maps, that sort of thing, but you can do that if you want. Now I think that looks better flat. I was just testing if that should be smooth or not. but I think it looks fine as it was. I think I'll also show you the animation rendered, and I'll show you how to render an animation. First of all, I'll make these flat just by selecting the right parts, middle clicking to deselect, and hit flat. Yeah, that looks better than smooth, I reckon. I think that's also a bit too bright. We can change the color and the power. Yeah, I think that looks better. Okay, so rendering animations. We can change the output format to a video file, and up there you just hit under render, just hit animation, and the animation we made before will be rendered in a series of images, and then when we hit play it will just go through all those images. They're actually stored in the Blender temporary files, so they're not saved, and if you just hit play once all the frames have been rendered, you can tell what frame it's on up in the top left. Just hit play and a new window will open where it plays the animation, and that looks pretty amazing actually. Bees knees. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll try to get back with more videos about doing stuff with Blender. See you later.